Well, I just want to say thank you for inviting me to talk today. I do have to shoot off afterwards because I've got to go back to Newcastle, which I had not envisaged when I said I would do this talk. I kind of envisaged still being in Cambridge. So before I left my job at Cambridgeshire Archives, where I was archive assistant, so I definitely recognise a few faces. If you ever went to the archives, I sat behind the desk in the search room, so I may have helped you with your research. Whilst I was archive assistant, I worked on this project looking at the Cambridge Charity Organisation Society and the case files that kind of Helen's used in her research. Hopefully it'll prove interesting to you guys. So just a little bit about the collection and the charity itself. So it was a successor of the Cambridge Mendicity Society, which was founded in around 1818, 1819, mostly to deal with the post-Napoleonic War problems. In 1871, Henry Sedgwick joined the society, and in 1879 it was dissolved to reform as the Cambridge Charity Organisation Society. It was modelled on the London one, and it aimed to relieve distress of the really deserving poor through detailed inquiries into the circumstances of the persons who applied for relief. I have searched numerous annual reports of this society, and I cannot just find what they decided was the really deserving poor. There's definitely indications of what they considered non-deserving, but what made you really deserving kind of still seems to remain elusive to me. If you ran like a public house or had anything essentially to do with pubs and drinking, definitely don't apply because you're not going to get any help. They are immediately kind of like, no, we don't want to know about that. Immoral character, take of that what you will from this period, what that means being involved in. So it's kind of quite restrictive, it seems, in what they would accept as kind of genuine help. So within the collection at the archives, which Helen has kind of looked at previously, there are nearly 3,000 individual case files, and they range from 1879 to 1927. So they cover quite a wide period. Kind of the bulk of them are about the 1880s, 1890s, and they are incredibly detailed. They have often the application form, but also the application form is not created equal, shall we say. Some of them are incredibly detailed and some of them offer barely any information. If you're lucky, you get correspondence and other supporting paperwork, because they really did do their research on people. And sometimes you get kind of character references and letters from various people that they've contacted regarding kind of applicants. They were catalogued and repackaged by volunteers from the Cambridge branch of NADFAS, so I do want to give them their credit as well, because they did make it more accessible than it had been initially, and hopefully I've made it even more accessible. So as a society, they had kind of two main objectives, which I found in their annual reports. So they wanted to provide efficient assistance to the persons who will be enabled by means of such assistance to tide over a time of distress or difficulty and to regain their former independent position. And then secondly, to grant pensions to deserving persons who have been unable to make provision for sickness or old age, so potentially their job just didn't allow them to kind of save, or who would feel degraded by the receipt of poor law relief, which I found quite interesting, that was enough of the shame of poor law was enough for them to be like, well, we might give you money then if you're going to feel that ashamed about having that help. The annual reports are particularly a treasure trove as well, kind of in connection with the case files, and they list statistics of the Society's work for that calendar year, broken down into categories of assisted versus non-assisted cases, and then within not assisted, kind of the reasons for that, and then providing details of the sources of assistance and the nature of assistance. So in 1885, which is just a year I randomly picked, they assisted 175 people, and And this is mostly through private persons, so kind of subscribers, various institutions, or the committee themselves, which is kind of the biggest contributor. But they didn't assist in 219. And the reasons for that are they decide they're ineligible, and that could be for a variety of reasons. Poor law was actually the better option, kind of the more appropriate option. Undeserving, but that was a quite small number. There was only 8 that were undeserving. And then they also kind of, the people that upon investigation they decide actually don't require relief, they're actually fine, or what they consider fine, obviously very relative. Kind of the nature of how they help is quite varied. So it might be medical. If someone's sick, sometimes they help people get into hospitals, kind of getting them into other various institutions, grants and loans, which Helen kind of covered a bit in hers, pensions, in some cases even employment, kind of making more general inquiries, as well as kind of sending out reports for people to kind of get into work, kind of making those connections. So grants and reports are kind of their main way that they help people, but obviously kind of probably each year that those figures kind of fluctuate a little bit. The reports also include illustrative cases from that year, so they kind of cherry pick some of the best ones. And they do include kind of both assisted and non-assisted illustrative cases. And for the non-assisted ones, that kind of does also tell you why they didn't help them. It is very, very common for it to be drinking, excessive drinking in particular. But it also might be that the poor law is better suited. Immoral character is also a good one. That's normally waged at women. Very rarely is a man considered an immoral character in these reports. And they actually had a couple as well where they've had instances of ones where the people applying are well-known imposters, so fraudsters kind of pretending they're people that they're not to get relief. And because they're so detailed in their inquiries, they've been able to work that out. And if you lie about who you are, it turns out they won't help you, probably unsurprisingly. And so kind of a little bit about how this project started and what I did. As archive assistants, we did a bit of kind of repackaging, and a bit like Helen found, realised the treasure trove of information in these files. It's such an underutilised collection, I feel, and I'm sure Helen agrees. Within the archive collection, for a variety of research purposes, social history, family history. We've had people at the archives that have used them for family histories and found connections that they've kind of discovered in census or electoral registers and kind of not worked out how someone's ended up there, found them in a case file and been like, oh, well, they were doing that in that year, and that's not a census year, so they would never have found that regardless. So I have created indexes that kind of group by occupation and then also by locality, so various streets in Cambridge. And the map was just a cool way to offer a visual representation of the data. And hopefully the aim of the project is to draw an interesting aspect to an interesting kind of area of Cambridge history, and the people that are often forgotten kind of for more official records. These people are poor and they don't come up in records very often, particularly because this kind of covers such a long period of time. People that vanish between censuses, kind of you can often find them in these files, and then get a bigger, clearer picture of their lives, which I think is quite lovely and important. So to create the map, I implemented a code system. So each category of occupation, of which there are about 39, got a different number. If you had more than one occupation, you got more than one number. So I've listed kind of some of the numbers there. Quite a lot had no occupation listed, so that got its own category as well. Other and undefined workers was mostly labourers and kind of more generic jobs like that. Road transport workers, kind of coachmen and jobs like that. And then agricultural occupations, again, agricultural labourers, gardeners, kind of those more kind of common ones that you would expect. This took me probably on and off nearly a year because I kept debating how best to code it to make it work. So the category of occupations are based on the 1921 census, because that was kind of the most detailed look into occupations, and they had different categories and they listed which occupations fell under that. So I used that as my base, and yeah, in the index for occupations as well, each occupation has a description of what it actually is. So particularly kind of for the ones that don't really exist anymore or that you would maybe not have heard of, they are all defined so that you know what they are. Some particularly interesting ones and just some very niche ones, like elastic spring fitter, which just put springs in like boots, and that was their entire job. So yeah, just some really like niche jobs that you don't really get now with kind of mechanisation or anything like that. So yeah, it was quite interesting, and yeah, I learned a lot of different jobs as a result. So the map, which is the pinnacle of this project, and if you went to the archives in the last like 2 years, you may have seen it in the foyer. So there were two maps, age and occupation, plotted across Cambridge City based on the about 1900 OS map. There's around 35 categories of occupations and 10 age groups, and it uses a scale that goes up in increments of 5. So if there's an occupation that has more than 5 people in an area, it kind of gets a bigger dot. Each category has a colour and a scale from 1 to 25. Most are within like 1 to 5, but particularly in some like lodging houses, you might get a kind of heavy like portion of kind of people that are labourers, so they got a bigger dot. So this is a small section of the map. So this is the like obviously Mill Road part of it. So each street has its coloured dots, and each kind of terrace and yard, the workhouse has its kind of own bit. So Mill Road actually is kind of not as densely kind of in need of relief as kind of other parts of Cambridge. The area of kind of like East Road, Newmarket Road, where the Grafton Centre is, very, very heavily populated with people needing relief, and the area around like Castle Hill, which I don't know if you know any of those parts of Cambridge, is probably not surprising. I do wonder if, like, because the railway, whether that made an impact or whether just actually at this period there's not that many people living here yet. I think equally as well, there's not, I kind of hoped in doing the map there would be some patterns. The answer is there are no patterns. There is absolutely no pattern across Cambridge in terms of age or like occupations. There's no density of like brickmakers or like jewellers, there's no pattern. But Mill Road potentially, I think, sees the least variation of colour, like for occupations. So potentially there's a pattern in that, I guess. But the answer is there's no pattern. And yeah, the whole map kind of covers all of Cambridge, but I can't show that in any great detail on one slide. So then I also did some further analysis. So I looked at kind of age and sex, and obviously you can see that there's obviously a very high peak in the between the ages of 30 and 39. conclusion of that, and obviously it's all very subjective without actually any like kind of proper evidence, is that particularly for the more manual jobs, if a man gets injured between 30 and 39, he's probably also got a young family, they're probably in need of more help. And it obviously tails off as you get older. It's obviously almost always more men than women applying. I do think part of that as well is that men tend to be the named figure for like whole family groups, whereas women tend to be applying because they're on their own. Whether that's because they're like single or they're widows, or you know, maybe they are in a family group but they're just the ones that wrote their name down. In terms of occupations, obviously personal is very heavily kind of out in the lead, and personal included like laundresses, washerwomen, any kind of servant. So obviously, yeah, it makes sense, particularly based on Helen's research, that there would be kind of those kind of figures. Other, again, is heavily kind of leaned by labourer, but you know, there are like woodworkers and there are brush makers and there are tobacconists. So there are quite a varied range of occupations, which I think before this project I wouldn't have kind of considered Cambridge having. So yeah, there is quite a variety of occupations. And I guess the question is, you know, are their occupations not represented as much because they were actually more secure, or actually is it just that there weren't people in them? Like, that's kind of potentially something to research later. I won't cover it too briefly because I'm pretty sure I don't have a lot of time. But I also looked at Eglantine Jebb's work. She actually went on to found Save the Children. But in the 1920s, she did a study of Cambridge, and kind of one of her kind of outputs was this rent map of Cambridge, where she looked at the rent across the city and broke it down into 5 categories. Not more than £8 a year, 8 to 15, 15 to 25, 25 to 50, and over 50. I mean, if only those were still the rent prices today, I would not have moved. And the darker the colour, the lower the rent is. It is interesting to see because actually that map kind of supports my map, in that the areas with the lower rent are the areas where more relief is being applied for, unsurprisingly. So the area around Castle Hill, the area around like where the Grafton is now, bits of Mill Road, but then you've obviously got like Newnham, which even now is still obviously quite fancy, where the rent is over 50. There were very few requests for relief from that part of the city. So in her study as well, she calculated that about 44% were in Class D, which is 8 to 15 a year, and about 21.5 are under 8 a year for rent. So yeah, we found the same pattern, which is obviously nice to know that, you know, 100 years apart clearly interpreted something right, because she's finding the same stuff that I found. But yeah, and that's a really interesting book as well, kind of Cambridge, a brief study in social questions, if you're interested in this period. And then I've got a few kind of personal stories to end on. So Wilson Palmer, he lived in Covent Garden, which is obviously one of the older parts of Mill Road, and he was a foundry worker. And he asked for assistance essentially because he was ill, and in his statement he said he had a fit about Christmas, and the application was filled in early February. And he went to hospital and he was still nervous and weak, and his wife had heart disease and liver complaints. As a result of the charity, they obviously did many inquiries, and they were, you know, known as steady and respectable people, always found them to be honest. This is exactly what this charity are looking for. They want people that are respectable and honest. So they were initially offered several weekly grants of 4 shillings. but they later actually purchased a mangle for Mrs. Palmer, as it was felt that this would be of a good help to her. Obviously, as kind of Helen covered as well, mangle, if you're blind as well, is obviously quite helpful. They actually also have several further applications in their case file, because the mangle breaks. So they lose that kind of extra source of income that they had, but also further ill health from both of them. So kind of, yeah, they continue to get a little bit of assistance, but obviously it's still a very precarious situation for them to be in. And kind of the image on the left is an example of kind of some of the supporting paperwork that you can find in these case files. So this is an example of kind of an inquiry form that they sent out to the physician of Wilson Palmer, just kind of asking, you know, what kind of work can he do, and is he fit to do that work now? These aren't in every case file. It would be a dream if they were, but there are quite a few that do have supporting paperwork, and that can just be a nice added bonus. And then the last one that I've got, so Antonio Riviera came from Spain, but he'd been in England for 17 years, and he was a merchant's clerk and interpreter. His application form is very scarce. He doesn't say what he wants assistance for, and in his statement he just says he's been in England for 17 years and that's what he's been doing. He listed 2 references, both of which were in Birmingham, and they were contacted, and both referees came back with no knowledge of this man. So unsurprisingly, his case was dismissed as undeserving because they could not prove anything about him. The case files as well are quite interesting in that they do offer kind of information about how much they're spending on rent, how many rooms that property has, if they're having help from anywhere else. So if they get pensions or they get like loans from anywhere else, if you know, if like friendly societies help them, it does list all of that. And I do think, Caro, there might actually be a case file for someone that lived in the Whereaway cottages. So I do think you'd be able to find the rent potentially for those properties, but I can't quite remember exactly, but I do think there is one. So yeah, in that regard, it's quite interesting as well to kind of, you know, also because it has like all the family members in that group and it has what they're doing, and so you can build quite a full picture of people's lives, but also kind of how expensive Cambridge was and kind of how much people were earning in their jobs at this point. So yeah, they're a real treasure trove and I love them. And I do want to just say as well that as of yesterday, kind of all the data sets for the individual streets are on Capturing Cambridge. So you can search, in theory, any street, and if there are any case files for that street, they will come up. And Capturing Cambridge as well would be very interested if any research is done using those to be told about those. I can't hang around to answer any questions after this kind of question bit. So if you do have any questions, please do contact the archives. If it's about the collection, they'll be able to help, but if it's something kind of like for me as well, they can contact me. So yeah, and I guess any questions?
You said quite a number of applications were turned down on the grounds of excessive drinking.
Yes.
Have you got a proportion?
It does seem to be the most common, but without kind of doing more exact kind of statistical looking into, I can't give you like an exact figure, but I would say it's probably, of the ones that they decide are ineligible, it's probably about like nearly half seems to be the most common. And there's a lot of comments in kind of like their inquiries that say like, oh, well, she drinks, or they're often found like out at the pub, or like they're a bit...
Okay, so do you think we can infer a connection between the number of pubs we found out and Sturton
Yes.
Town?
Yeah, probably, because there's also quite a lot in like the Castle Hill area, where there are obviously also a lot of pubs, or were a lot of pubs. So yeah, probably. kind of, yeah. Too many pubs for this charity to feel like they can help anyone. But yeah.
So you said the original charity started about 1818.
Mhm.
Does your song go all the way back to then?
No, it does start kind of when they rebrand themselves. I do think we have some for the Cambridge Mendicity Society, but it tends to be kind of like minutes and annual reports, not the case files. And actually kind of that charity is sort of continually rebranded, and it still does exist as Cambridge Aid today. So they do still help people. I'm not sure what the requirements of Cambridge Aid are anymore, but kind of before 1880 it's quite like official records like minutes and annual reports. And then 1880 kind of we start to get the case files, but also like the annual reports and stuff as well.
Do you know how large the fund they had to dispose?
It does say in the annual reports, it does seem to vary, and they have kind of different pots of money. So they have like their pension fund is separate from like their grant fund. I can't remember any of the figures off the top of my head, and it obviously differs, but each annual report as well kind of lists the like subscriptors for that year. So quite a lot of the colleges helped, but also kind of some of the more, I don't know if you've ever looked into any kind of like Cambridge society, like you'll see like a lot of the same names come up, like, you know, Darwin, Heifers, like kind of people that had prominent businesses and just had a lot of money tend to kind of help similar-ish societies. I think in the first year it obviously wasn't very big, but I think it does grow. And they do, in the annual reports they do kind of list how much money they've actually given out. I don't think they tend to give out more than about £5 in one go. That tends to be their like maximum. I think there's obviously very few cases where they probably do give more, but £5 seems to be their like limit. And most is a lot less, like it's a couple of quid. And in the previous kind of iteration of this talk, I had someone that was lent £2 to buy a sewing machine as like a loan, but she couldn't pay it back, so they repossessed the sewing machine. They were obviously also quite strict about getting that money back. And if you couldn't afford to do that, they would take the necessary steps to ensure that they got that, the book. Yes?
Was there any overlap between the CCOS and the Board of Guardians in the early 20th century?
There doesn't seem to be that much. They do just seem to refer people to poor law. There is definitely a case where the Board of Guardians were clearly involved with like a young child who had been in the workhouse. I think his leg had been amputated or something, and then the like CCOS kind of got involved because he didn't want to be in the workhouse anymore. He wanted to be out working, and the Board of Guardians were putting adverts in the newspaper kind of on like his behalf, but also the charity's behalf. So I don't think it's super common, but like it's not completely like separate. But kind of their earliest annual report does kind of state that they kind of existed because they wanted to make it a bit less confusing, like all the different avenues of help, and it was like they kind of wanted to be like an overall source, but then they can also kind of connect people to the more appropriate like societies or institutions. And kind of in the annual reports where they say that they kind of refer them to institutions or organisations, I don't know how many of those are like the institution is like the workhouse. It doesn't go into that like level of detail, annoyingly.
Thanks very much, Laura. Really interesting. You mentioned Henry Sidgwick at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
What's the significance?
I think he was just a really well-known philanthropist at that point.
Did he stay involved?
I don't think he stays involved that long. I think he just kind of oversees the transition and then like departs. His name doesn't seem to come up that often in like the annual reports, kind of like after the initial like couple.
This may challenge your memory of your records too. But you had a hawker of oranges. Can
or otherwise they don't.
Yeah, I think most of the time it's because they're ill. Yeah, it's normally help whilst ill. Sometimes you get like they want to emigrate. Sometimes it's loans to buy various bits to get employment. But yeah, I would say that it's probably because they were ill. That's like the main percentage of them. But that would be like another area that I'd want to explore, would kind of be to look at the different reasons and look at the percentage. But I don't have as readily available access to that collection anymore, so it's a bit trickier to explore it in the way that I want to. Yes, Helen.
Could you explain a bit more about the committees of the people who are running it? Because I haven't seen these annual reports,
Yeah.
which sound fascinating. But when I go through these huge case studies, particularly if they're a family that's needing help for a long time, or there's a lot of backstory,
Yeah.
there's two things that these women seem to be doing. A, there's some of them, I think I mentioned to you, their names I recognise. So the people you then see being active in the suffragette movement or something about another 10 years later, they're worthy women. They're from these big families, like, as you say, like the Darwin family. But they also obviously have local networks, because quite a lot of the time they're helping women find work. It's men as well, but the cases I've looked at, a lot of them have been single women or distressed women or women whose partners have disappeared or who have died. And they're finding them mending work or childcare work fairly locally, so that they'll go into the bigger houses on Bateman Street or in that Gonville and Keys development. And I was thinking, well, they must have to give a lot of time to this work, to be doing all that networking and all that correspondence. So I wondered how much that comes across in the committee papers, and what sense you have of who these people are. They must be incredibly committed to the goals of the society to put in this much time.
Yeah, I mean, the annual reports kind of list who's in the committee that year. I've not spent as much time as I would like on those, so I imagine there are probably names that come up a lot. But yeah, I don't know, I guess if you're like a wealthy woman in this period, like charity work is like kind of your entire life, so you sort of end up being able to devote as much time as you want to it. And yeah, definitely, I think they've obviously got quite a good network of like subscribers to it. And I guess, yeah, like Cambridge is quite small in this period, really. Probably like if you're of that elite circle, you probably know everyone, and you're able to make kind of those inquiries and those connections with people that maybe need like domestic help or like have work. I will add as well that in the index kind of like of occupations as well, I did include like a college section, so anyone that worked for any of the colleges is also kind of like listed separately. Tends to mostly be like college servants or like bed makers, sometimes kitchen like porters and stuff. So it's quite interesting as well that kind of working for a college didn't necessarily mean that you were able to escape the need for relief. Kind of, yeah, being involved in the gown side doesn't necessarily mean that you're protected in that way.
Well, just like your case of the Ireland working for Headley, for a big company, somebody who's childless, and I find that really shocking that in fact his sister-in-law is applying for relief. She gets relief at one point, and they say, oh, she's got all this nice furniture from the Headley family in the front room, including a piano, but she can't pay her bills because her husband's got emphysema.
Well, there was also someone that, it doesn't say Chivers particularly, but it says jam manufacturer in Histon. So make of that what you will. Like, that's definitely Chivers. And yeah, she was applying for relief. So yeah, I think it kind of, it goes to show that it doesn't matter if you're part of one of those big businesses, that if one like thing goes wrong, then you can end up needing help just as much as someone that has, you know, a very infrequent line of work.
That is interesting that colleges are not looking after this sort of
Yeah.
either, are they?
But yes, so if you have any No, I'll take it.
Did the catchment area include Chesterton, north of the river?
Yes, my map kind of obviously basically covers Cambridge because that was just easier, but there are applications from Chesterton, quite a lot of parishes in Cambridgeshire, even from some big cities like London, Birmingham, Liverpool. I don't know the percentage of those that they actually accepted help for, but there are definitely applications coming from outside. But again, it would be interesting to look at kind of actually whether those are ever even kind of entertained as like potential help, because there's not really anything in the annual reports that suggests they won't help people externally from Cambridge. But yeah, and there's quite a lot of kind of like charities and organisations that are also applying for help. There was like a boys' convalescent home in, I think it's Southend, that was applying for help for like a variety of reasons. So yeah, it's quite varied. It's a collection I feel like I've barely scratched the surface of. There's a lot more kind of analysis that I'd love to do on it. It's just obviously a bit harder now that I've moved to 100 miles away.
People must get in touch with you or through the
Yes,
archives.
yeah, if you contact the archives or...
We'd like to, I'm afraid we need to let Laura go.
Yeah, I would love to stay, but it's going to take me 4 hours to get home. So.
It's a really fascinating talk.
Thank you.